stories for bedtime
and car time and playtime.
And anytime you want to hear how much Jesus loves you in all this world.
Even little birds.
Hi, I'm Pastor Sarah at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Davenport, Iowa. Welcome to this podcast where we tell stories told just for kids and for kids at heart. Every week, we tell a story about Jesus from the Bible. And as you know, for these stories on this podcast, we need to bring our imaginations. We are going to imagine that there was a little bird in all of those Bible stories, a little bird who was friends with Jesus, a little bird who saw all the things that Jesus did and heard all the things that Jesus said. Last week, Little Bird was on a mountainside listening to Jesus as he taught his closest friends. He taught them the important things they needed to know to follow him. This week, we're going to hear a story about a person who put in a lot of effort to try to see Jesus, and whose life was totally changed after he met him. So open up your ears and fire up your imagination for this week's story.
Little Bird and Jesus meet Zacchaeus.
Little Bird and Jesus, along with his closest friends, spent a lot of time traveling. They'd walk from town to town, and in every town, a large crowd of people would gather to hear Jesus talk. They'd hear Jesus talk about God's dream of love and abundant life for all people. People would see them coming, and they'd tell all their friends, and those friends would tell their friends. So by the time Jesus arrived in the town, the road would be lined with people, hoping to get close to Jesus. This happened one day when they went to a town called Jericho. Jesus and his friends walked into town, and the roads were filled with people shouting with excitement. Little Bird often got overwhelmed by all the people, so she'd usually fly to the nearest tree and sit up high on a branch, far from the crowd. When they got to Jericho, she saw a big sycamore tree and knew that it would be just the place to get away from the crowd. But as she landed in that tree, she realized she wasn't alone. She was used to meeting other birds when she landed in trees, but goodness was she surprised when she landed on her branch and found a person in the tree with her. And not just any person, but a grown man. And not just any man, but a man who was clearly very rich. He had on the fanciest velvet clothes and had gold rings on all of his fingers. Little Bird stared at the man, trying to figure out why this rich man was hanging out in a tree. She'd never seen anything like it. As she stared, the man noticed Little Bird, and he started talking to her. "Pretty funny seeing me up in a tree, isn't it? I haven't actually climbed a tree since I was a kid. It's just that I've heard amazing things about Jesus, and I really want to see him," the rich man said. "But I couldn't see through the crowd. I'm not particularly tall. I'm pretty short, really. And I couldn't see over the shoulders and the heads of the people around me." Little Bird cocked her head to the side and listened. "The thing is, little sparrow, it's not just that I'm short. The people here don't really like me, and for good reason," the man said. "I'm a tax collector. The Roman government, who rules this land and treats people terribly, they hired me to collect taxes, money everyone pays to the empire. They not only have to pay an unfair amount, but, well, you see, I'm ashamed to say it, but I take some of the people's money and I keep it for myself. That's how I got so rich. So you can see why people don't like me and why I'm here, alone, up in the sycamore tree. Little Bird could understand why he wasn't liked. She felt sad for those people who had been cheated by him. But as the man talked, Little Bird noticed Jesus walking right over to their tree. Jesus looked up at them. Little Bird watched the man. He looked like he wanted to hide, like he knew he was in trouble and was worried about what Jesus would say. But Jesus didn't scold him or yell at him. Instead, Jesus said, "Zacchaeus, come down from that tree. I'm coming over to your house for lunch." For a second, the rich man, Zacchaeus, paused. "Me? You want to come to my house?" He studied Jesus, looking for judgment, but saw only kindness and grace. So he climbed down from the tree and looked up at Jesus and said, "Jesus, I'd be so honored to have you over. Just follow me. My house is this way." With surprised delight, Zacchaeus led Jesus to his house. Little Bird flew down from the tree and followed, along with most of the people from the town. They grumbled between themselves. What is Jesus going to his house for? Doesn't he know who Zacchaeus is and what he's done to us? He's been terrible to us. Why is he going there? Little Bird listened, and she had to agree with them. This was most unusual. But she had been around Jesus long enough to know that he saw in people goodness that most people ignored. She'd seen enough people meet Jesus and change their lives completely, changing their meanness and isolation into love and friendships in ways that never before seemed possible. This was just part of the miraculous work that Jesus did in the world. They walked through town towards Zacchaeus' house, and the whole way the townspeople talked about the terrible things that Zacchaeus had done. Zacchaeus must have overheard all the grumbling, and he knew they were right. And the gracious love of Jesus was already changing him. He knew that Jesus was inviting him into a whole new, beautiful life. So when they got to the courtyard of his big house, Zacchaeus stopped and looked at Jesus and all of the people. He stood up as tall as he could and he said, "Jesus, I'm sorry. I've stolen and I've cheated and I've hurt people. I want to make it right. I will give away half of my money to people who are poor, and every person I've cheated, I will repay 4 times over." The grumbling people were stunned into silence. But Jesus smiled his amazing smile and said, "Beloved Zacchaeus, you are a new person. Today, freedom and joy have come to this house, and this whole community will find new life and hope because of your generosity and their forgiveness." Soon the crowd was noisy again. But now they weren't grumbling. It was a celebration. Little Bird flew up to a tree by herself and looked down and watched as Zacchaeus started to repay people the money he had stolen, apologizing and making things right. The people gathered around Zacchaeus, shaking his hand, rebuilding broken relationships. Eventually, Zacchaeus found his way to Jesus and said to him, "I invited you over for lunch. Do you mind if I invite the whole town to join us?" Jesus laughed. amazed at how much Zacchaeus changed. He had caught the joy of what it means to follow Jesus, a life of such generosity, sharing, community, and so much happiness. From up in her tree, Little Bird watched as Zacchaeus welcomed Jesus and his new friends into his home. There was so much laughter and friendship. Zacchaeus might not have grown an inch, but somehow he seemed a bit taller. Wow, I do love this story about Zacchaeus and Jesus. Do you like to climb trees? Can you imagine Zacchaeus up in that tree? Maybe you can draw a picture of Little Bird and Zacchaeus up in the tree. What would you do if Jesus was coming over to your house for lunch? What would you serve him to eat? Where would he sit? I love this story about Zacchaeus because it shows us how much people can change and how much joy comes in sharing. Jesus repeatedly invites us to be people who share what they have and to give away what they have to others. But sharing can be hard sometimes. Zacchaeus knew that when you don't share, it can be pretty lonely. But when we do share, we get the fun of having people to play with and the joy of making a difference for others. This week, think about the ways you can share what you have with other people. Maybe people you know, your own siblings or friends, or maybe strangers who might need some basic things. And when you do, stand a little bit taller, knowing that in your sharing, you are following Jesus and bringing more of his love into the world. And that's the end of this episode of Little Bird and Jesus.
Now flap your little wings. Sing a little song.
And remember that to Jesus,
You will always belong.
Thanks for listening to Little Bird and Jesus, a podcast of St. Paul Lutheran Church in Davenport, Iowa. For more information on St. Paul, visit us at stpaulqc.org. Come visit us again next week as Little Bird continues her journey.